A dog on a flight suddenly starts barking nonstop. Not at a person, but at something no one else can see. What happens next turns an ordinary flight into a terrifying and unforgettable journey. Before we jump into the story, tell me, where are you watching from? Drop your location and share your thoughts in the comments below. Now let's get started. Allison Grant stepped on a flight 2286 from Seattle to Chicago with a quiet sigh, slinging her backpack over one shoulder and clutching a hot paper cup of black coffee in her other hand. The boarding process had been smooth, unusually so for Seattle-Tacoma on a Monday morning. She found her seat, 14A, window, and slid in with the relief of someone used to long travel days. The air in the cabin was crisp, recycled, and sterile, carrying faint scents of coffee, perfume, and the ever-present chemical tang of jet fuel. Outside, the tarmac glistened under a gray northwest sky. As passengers trickled in, some chatting, some stressed, and others groggy with sleep, Allison adjusted her sweater and tried to settle in for the 4-hour flight. Just as the final boarding call echoed faintly down the jetway, a man in his 70s shuffled down the aisle holding a worn leather leash. At the other end of it was a golden retriever, broad-chested, intelligent eyes, and the unmistakable red vest of a certified service dog. The man, who would later introduce himself as Mr. Delaney, moved slowly, pausing briefly to adjust his hearing aid. The dog trotted beside him obediently, quiet and calm. For the first few minutes, everything seemed perfectly normal. Then, just as the cabin doors were sealed and the plane began taxiing toward the runway, the dog let out a sharp, sudden bark. It wasn't a playful yip or a casual woof. It was deep, loud, and insistent. People turned in their seats. Mr. Delaney muttered an apology, patting the dog gently, trying to hush it. But the golden retriever was fixated, head turned stiffly to the side, gaze locked on the opposite aisle across from row 23. There was no one sitting there, just an empty seat. A perfectly ordinary, unoccupied seat. The barking escalated as the aircraft sped down the runway. By the time the wheels lifted off the ground, the dog was growling under its breath, short bursts of warning barks cutting through the background hum of engines and quiet chatter. A baby in row 18 began to cry. A woman across the aisle glanced nervously between the barking dog and the seat it stared at. Others mumbled irritation under their breath. Allison twisted in her seat to get a better look. The dog wasn't looking at Mr. Delaney or reacting to noise. It wasn't sniffing the air or checking the overhead bin. It was focused with unsettling intensity on the empty seat across from it, 23C. Its ears were upright, body tense, muscles ready to spring. Something about its posture sent a ripple of unease down her spine. A flight attendant with auburn hair and a tight bun approached quickly, her name tag reading Marla. She crouched beside Mr. Delaney. "Sir, I'm sorry, but your dog he doesn't do this," Mr. Delaney said before she could finish. "Never. He's trained for seizure alerts. He's flown with me half a dozen times. I don't know what's gotten into him." The dog barked again, this time louder, a piercing echo against the aluminum cabin walls. Marla looked at the seat the dog was barking at. Her eyes narrowed slightly. "There's no one in that seat, right?" she asked quietly. Mr. Delaney shook his head. "Not that I saw." Allison leaned over the armrest. "He's not barking at a person," she said. "He's barking at something else." By now, other passengers were visibly unsettled. Someone in row 22 asked if it was safe to fly with an aggressive dog. A businessman up front rang the call button, demanding to know what was going on. But Allison couldn't take her eyes off that dog, or the spot it was locked on to with the urgency of a soldier spotting a landmine. It didn't look angry. It looked alert, protective. As the plane leveled off at 30,000 feet, the dog's barking dropped to a low growl, still staring at seat 23C, unblinking, unrelenting. Whatever it saw, or sensed, was still there, and it wasn't human. The low growl never really stopped. It pulsed in the space like a warning signal no one could interpret. Row 23 had gone strangely quiet. Mr. Delaney leaned down to his dog, whispering in a firm yet soothing tone, "Tucker, that's enough now, buddy. You're okay. You're okay." But Tucker wasn't listening. His body was tense, ears upright, eyes laser-locked on the same empty seat across the aisle. A vein pulsed near his temple. The growl deepened. Allison unbuckled her seatbelt, ignoring the "please remain seated" chime that had just pinged overhead, and crouched in the aisle next to the dog. "Mind if I try?" she asked Mr. Delaney. He looked relieved. "Go ahead. I don't know what's gotten into him." She extended her hand slowly, palm down, letting Tucker sniff. The dog gave her a quick glance, acknowledged her presence, but returned immediately to that same invisible target. Allison had volunteered at a trauma center back in Chicago, where she helped handle emotional support animals. She'd seen dogs nervous before. She'd seen them alert. But this was different. "He's not scared," she murmured. "He's watching something. Guarding." She ran a hand down Tucker's back. His fur was warm, but as her hand passed over his shoulders, she felt something strange. The hair was raised. Tucker was in a full defensive posture. She followed his gaze again and found herself staring at the seatback of 23C. It was perfectly still, perfectly normal, yet she felt something crawl along the base of her neck like a cold breath. Marla returned, crouching beside her with a tablet in her hands. "Look," she whispered, showing them the passenger manifest. "That seat's supposed to be empty. It wasn't purchased. Nobody checked in for it. Nobody scanned a boarding pass." "Then who was sitting there?" Allison asked, keeping her voice low. "People saw someone, didn't they?" Marla's lips tightened. "I thought I did during boarding. A guy in a black hoodie, sitting right there. I remember him not making eye contact when I greeted him. Thought he was just tired. But now—" She didn't finish the sentence. Mr. Delaney shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "Tucker started barking the minute we left the gate," he said. "Not before. Not during boarding. Just as we pulled away." He looked down at the dog. "He's trained to detect seizures before they happen, even chemical changes in the brain. He's never barked at an empty seat." The conversation was quiet, but nearby passengers were starting to murmur. A woman one row ahead turned halfway in her seat. "Is everything all right?" she asked, concern in her voice. Allison gave a polite nod, just a little service dog confusion. Nothing serious. The dog's growl suddenly intensified. Tucker lunged forward a few inches, pulling against the leash. His nose was pointed straight at 23C, lips curling slightly now. Allison instinctively reached out and steadied him. Her hand was trembling slightly. She didn't know why. "Maybe he smells something," Marla suggested, her voice uncertain. "No," Allison said quietly. "Smells don't make dogs growl like this. Not trained ones. Something's bothering him, and I don't think it's a smell." The lights overhead flickered once. Just for a second. A mechanical glitch, maybe. Someone coughed 2 rows back. The cabin had grown noticeably quieter, like everyone could feel that something wasn't quite right. Tucker finally stopped barking, but now he was just staring. Still, unmoving. His chest rose and fell in shallow breaths. Ears locked forward, eyes wide, tail stiff. Allison felt it again, that strange cold sensation along her arms. Like the air had shifted. Not the cabin temperature, not the ventilation, just the space itself. C-23C was still empty, but it didn't feel that way. And somewhere deep in her chest, a thought took root, one she didn't want to say out loud. What if the dog wasn't warning them about something that was going to happen? What if it was already happening right now? The hum of the engines droned on, steady and low, but inside the cabin of Flight 2286, the atmosphere had shifted. A thin thread of tension wound between the rows, invisible but unmistakable. Passengers, once distracted by their phones or trying to nap, now kept glancing back toward row 23 where Tucker, the golden retriever, still stared unblinking at seat 23C. The barking had stopped, but somehow the silence felt worse. It was the kind of silence that carried weight, like the pause before a storm. Allison eased back in her seat in 14A, but her body remained taut, as if it refused to settle. She reached for her coffee, but it had gone cold. Across the aisle, she caught Marla's eye as the flight attendant made her way slowly up the cabin, pausing at each row, checking seat belts and offering fake smiles that didn't reach her eyes. When she reached row 23, she lingered, staring down at the empty seat. She didn't touch it, didn't lean in close, just looked. A few rows up, a teenage boy named Ben, maybe 17, headphones around his neck, hoodie up, turned in his seat and whispered something to his mom beside him. Allison couldn't hear what he said, but his eyes kept darting to 23C like he was watching a bug crawl across the ceiling. Tucker's gaze had not moved. Not once. And that's when the whisper started. Not from a person, but from the intercom system. A faint crackle, then static, then a whisper that barely rose above the white noise of flight. Seat 23. The words were broken, as if pulled through water. Still there, Allison sat bolt upright. Others glanced around. Mr. Delaney's mouth opened slightly. "What was that?" someone asked aloud. Marla grabbed the intercom phone near the galley and hissed into it. "Cockpit, this is cabin. Did someone patch in just now?" A moment passed. Then the captain's voice, clear and professional, came over the speakers. "Apologies for the static. Minor signal feedback. All systems normal. Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened." But that wasn't normal feedback. Feedback didn't speak words. Allison looked back at 23C again. The seat was still empty. But a new detail made her stomach twist. The seatbelt was now buckled. "I swear to God, that was unbuckled earlier," Marla said quietly, confirming Allison's fear. Mr. Delaney paled. "I saw it too. Nobody was sitting there. I saw it during boarding." Tucker saw something else. Allison's heart thudded. It's like something is here, but we can't see it. But Tucker can. A passenger 2 rows ahead stood suddenly and turned around, a balding man in a business blazer with a Bluetooth headset clipped to his ear. "Is this some kind of prank?" he demanded. "Because if it is, it's not funny. My daughter is afraid of flying, and this isn't helping." "I'm not making this up," Allison said. Her voice was calm but firm. "There's something wrong with that seat. This dog, he knows it." The man rolled his eyes and sat back down with a scoff, but others were beginning to murmur now. Anxiety was catching, and Flight 2286 had just shifted from minor disturbance to group unease. Allison leaned toward Marla. "Can you check the manifest again? Was anyone ever booked in 23C, even temporarily?" Marla looked torn but nodded. She disappeared to the front of the cabin and returned minutes later, her face pale. "This is going to sound insane," she said in a low voice, "but yes." The seat was reserved under a name. But when they tried to check in at the gate, the system said they were already on board. Allison blinked. "What do you mean, already on board?" "The boarding pass was scanned," Marla whispered. "But no one saw them come through." Tucker began to whine again, low, distressed but not loud. His body was rigid, eyes still locked on 23C. Allison turned back slowly. The buckle. The whisper. The reservation that shouldn't exist. Seat 23C wasn't empty. Not anymore. The moment Marla uttered those words, "already on board," something invisible and cold seemed to pass through the center of the plane. Not a gust of air, not a shift in pressure, but a feeling, like a presence, like something ancient and still brushing the surface of their reality, quiet but deeply aware. Allison didn't say anything right away. She could feel the passengers behind her shifting, some pulling earbuds out, others glancing around with forced smiles that didn't reach their eyes. There were too many people listening now, too many catching on. Marla leaned in closer, her voice barely above a whisper. "The passenger listed for seat 23C. His name is Thomas Albridge. The system shows he checked in. The barcode on his boarding pass was scanned, time-stamped at 7:41 a.m. Gate 6A. But I swear to you, I never saw him walk on. And I'm the only one who greeted passengers at the door." Allison's brow furrowed. "So you're telling me the airline thinks he's on this flight, but he's not?" Marla swallowed. "Or worse, he is." They both turned to glance again at the seat in question. 23C buckled. Empty. But empty in the way a dark hallway feels empty just after a door creaks open. You know it's supposed to be safe, but some primal part of your brain tells you to run. Tucker whined again. The golden retriever had settled onto the floor now, paws pressed out in front of him like a sphinx, but his head was still raised and focused entirely on the seat. Mr. Delaney looked rattled. He rubbed his temples. I've had this dog 5 years. He's never behaved this way. Not once. He doesn't even react to turbulence. But this, whatever it is, he won't stop tracking it. Allison nodded slowly. He's not barking now. He's watching. Like it's moving. Marla blinked. Moving. Allison shifted in her seat and looked over her shoulder again. What if that thing isn't just sitting there anymore? A jolt suddenly rattled the cabin. Not enough to throw anyone from their seat, but a sharp, quick tremor that made the overhead bins creak. A few people gasped. Someone yelped. The fastened seatbelt sign dinged again, though no one had dared to get up. The captain's voice came over the intercom. Ladies and gentlemen, we've hit a minor air pocket. Please remain seated. We'll be cruising steadily in just a moment. But that hadn't felt like a pocket of turbulence. That felt like something had bumped the plane from the inside. Ben, the teenage boy a few rows ahead, slowly raised his hand. Excuse me, he said aloud, awkward and hesitant. Did anyone else just see something in the reflection of the window? Everyone turned. His mom put a hand on his arm. Ben, don't start. No, I'm serious, he said louder now. I looked out the window just now, and he stopped himself. It wasn't a person. It was like a shape, moving between the rows, but outside the reflection, like it wasn't where it was supposed to be. A woman in 25D stood abruptly. Okay, that's it. I want off this flight. Her voice cracked at the edges. I don't care if we're in the air. I want this plane turned around. You can't just land a plane because of a dog and a ghost story, someone muttered. But others weren't so sure anymore. Marla raised her hands. Everyone, please stay calm. I'll speak with the captain. But she looked more pale than composed. She turned and briskly walked to the front of the cabin. Allison exhaled slowly, trying to keep her thoughts from spiraling. But deep down, she felt it too, that instinct, that ancient whisper in the back of her brain that said, something is on this plane that doesn't belong here. Something that had boarded without ever passing through the gate. She turned to Mr. Delaney. Do you know what kind of things dogs are trained to detect besides seizures? He hesitated. Sometimes death. The captain's voice came again, calm and clipped. We've hit some unexpected turbulence, folks, but we're working to maintain a smooth ride. Please remain seated with your belts fastened. The usual announcement. Neutral. Professional. But now no one was soothed by it. The voice didn't carry the weight of authority. It felt like it was hiding something. Or someone. Marla hadn't returned from the cockpit. 10 minutes had passed. In airplane time, especially mid-crisis, that felt like forever. A few passengers were starting to murmur. Others stared straight ahead, their minds spinning with possibilities they didn't want to believe. Allison leaned toward Mr. Delaney. Do you think the pilot knows something? Delaney looked shaken. If he doesn't, he will soon. That bump earlier, it didn't feel like turbulence. Tucker reacted a full second before it happened, like he knew it was coming. Allison glanced toward the front of the plane. No sign of Marla. She checked her phone. No signal, no internet. Of course not. They were too far above land for any connection. They were sealed in a metal tube, 30,000 feet in the air, and whatever had joined them wasn't human. Then the intercom cracked again. But this time, it didn't carry the captain's voice. The sound that came through wasn't speech. Exactly. It was like a hiss, layered with a breathy, half-formed whisper. Words tried to emerge, but they twisted on the way out, distorted, like someone speaking underwater. It was rhythmic, slow, and almost curious. Something, or someone was trying to talk. Still. Here, seat 23. Every head in the cabin snapped toward the speakers above their seats. A woman screamed. Someone near the back stood and started walking toward the front, ignoring the fastened seatbelt light. Sit down, another passenger shouted. But no one was in charge anymore. Allison's breath caught in her throat. The voice, it didn't come from the cockpit, and it didn't belong to anyone on board. It wasn't electronic feedback. It was intentional, like it wanted them to know it was there. And then it repeated, only this time, louder, clearer, and unmistakably human. Don't look away. The intercom cut off with a sharp snap, and in that breathless silence, every light in the cabin flickered. Not just flickered, went out. Darkness swallowed them. A collective gasp swept the cabin. People fumbled for phones, tray tables, seat edges. Babies cried. Phones lit up in pale rectangles, floating faces cast in eerie blue light. Then a strange sound, a deep, shuddering creak, like something metal straining under pressure. It came from the back of the plane. Then a thud. Then another. Allison froze. She didn't want to turn around. But Tucker did. The golden retriever stood. Not slowly. Not cautiously. He leapt into the aisle, barking violently toward the back of the aircraft. A man screamed. "It's back there." Something moved. It brushed past my leg. Panic erupted. Some passengers began standing. Others huddled into their seats, sobbing, praying. Overhead bins rattled as if nudged by something from above. The lights flickered once, then blinked back on. When they did, the cabin seemed normal. Too normal. Every passenger frozen in place, staring at one another. But one thing was different. Allison turned toward 23C. The seatbelt was no longer buckled. It was stretched across the aisle, like someone had stood up and walked away. The seatbelt from 23C lay across the aisle like a warning. A simple strap of fabric, and yet it held the weight of something unseen, something undeniable. Passengers stared at it in stunned silence. The tension in the air so thick it felt like trying to breathe through wet wool. No one moved. No one dared. Not even the flight attendants. Allison could feel her own heart thudding in her ears. She glanced at Tucker, who had stopped barking but remained rigid, his ears pinned back, body low to the ground. His gaze was no longer fixed on 23C. It was now slowly tracking something unseen, moving down the aisle. She followed his eyes, row by row. Then, without warning, the man seated in 18D, an older gentleman in a navy windbreaker, lurched out of his seat. His arms flailed wildly as if swatting at invisible hands. "Get it off me," he screamed. "It's grabbing me." He stumbled into the aisle, his eyes wide with terror, clawing at his face, his neck, as if unseen fingers were wrapping around him. A young woman in 17C tried to help him, but as she reached forward, her hands passed through nothing but air. "Sir, there's nothing." He let out a blood-curdling scream and collapsed, twitching violently. People around him shouted, leaping up despite the captain's voice now barking over the intercom. Everyone remained seated. "Flight crew, secure the cabin." But the flight crew was nowhere to be seen. Marla hadn't returned from the cockpit, and the two attendants at the rear of the plane, Allison had just realized, had vanished. No one had seen them go. No one had heard anything. Allison rose, her hands trembling, and rushed toward the collapsed man. "Move! I know CPR," she shouted, pushing past two stunned passengers. She knelt beside him, placed her ear to his mouth. Shallow breathing. No visible wounds, but his eyes were open, locked on something above. Pupils dilated, mouth slightly open. It wasn't a seizure. It was terror. She looked up, and for the briefest instant, she saw it too. Not fully, not clearly, but something. A shimmer in the air, like heat rising from pavement. A ripple moving along the ceiling, weaving between the oxygen masks. There, and then gone. "Did anyone else see that?" she asked. No one answered, but she knew the answer. The silence was louder than words. Then, slowly, the overhead bins along the right side began to creak open one by one. Click, 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 as if invisible hands were checking each one. Something searching, or inspecting. Tucker barked again, but it wasn't the same frantic noise from earlier. It was lower, a warning, a final line. The man on the floor suddenly gasped and sat bolt upright. "It's not done yet," he whispered. People screamed. Someone in the back began sobbing hysterically. Allison grabbed the man by the shoulders. "What did you see?" she asked. His eyes darted side to side. "Not a man. Not a ghost. It's too old to be either." "What do you mean?" He swallowed hard. "It's watching us. Learning us. Picking. Picking what?" He opened his mouth to answer, but the cabin lights cut out again. Darkness. A single scream tore through the black, then silence. A second later, the lights flicked back on, and another seat was now empty. 10B. And the seatbelt? Buckled again. The cabin was eerily still. All eyes locked on seat 10B, the seat that was now inexplicably empty. Just moments earlier, it had been occupied by a woman in a red cardigan, middle-aged, quiet, reading a paperback. Allison remembered her clearly. She remembered the book cover. She remembered the way the woman had smiled politely when handing her trash to the flight attendant. Now, the seat sat as if she'd never been there. But the seatbelt was fastened. Neatly, perfectly, like someone had buckled it after she vanished. Passengers erupted into panic. One man shouted, "That's the second one. People are disappearing." A woman screamed. Another fumbled for the flight attendant call button, pounding it over and over, but no one came. Several passengers were standing now, looking around, clinging to seats, and demanding answers. The atmosphere in the cabin had shifted from confusion to chaos, simmering just below full-blown hysteria. Amid the uproar, Tucker remained still. Allison turned to him, watching. His nose twitched. His eyes followed something she couldn't see, as though he were watching a shape slink between seats, weaving down the aisle. His ears twitched back, and a low, constant growl rumbled from his chest. He didn't bark this time. He didn't jump. He tracked, and Allison realized Tucker was their only warning system. She dropped to one knee beside him. "What do you see, boy?" she whispered. "Where is it now?" She reached out a hand toward his collar, and the moment her fingers brushed his fur, he let out a sudden, sharp whimper and darted 3 seats back, planting himself beside the aisle and pointing his nose straight at the exit row. Row 21, directly behind 23C. Mr. Delaney called out. He's never done that. Not once. He's pointing, like he's tracking a target. The golden retriever didn't bark. He just stood frozen, tail stiff, eyes unblinking. Allison rose to her feet slowly, scanning the rows. Every face was tight with fear, some wet with tears, some stone cold from shock. No one said it aloud, but it was clear now, whatever was happening, it wasn't mechanical. It wasn't the altitude. It wasn't cabin pressure or turbulence or hypoxia. Something was on board, something they couldn't see. Then came the low sound again, not from the intercom this time, from the cabin itself. A wet, humming rasp, like breathing but wrong. Slow, deliberate, a gurgle at the end of each exhale. It came from nowhere and everywhere. People held their breath, trying to listen, to track it. Tucker barked once. Loud. One bark only. And in that instant, the cabin lights blinked out for a third time. This time, the darkness lasted longer. Long enough for Allison to feel someone, or something, pass by her in the aisle. She didn't see it, but she felt it. Cold. Damp. Not air. Not wind. Not touch. Just wrongness. When the lights snapped back on, a collective gasp filled the cabin. Tucker was gone. Allison whirled around. No, no. Mr. Delaney stood, shouting, "Tucker," but the dog was nowhere in sight. His leash was still clipped to the seat leg, dangling loosely. His blanket was there, his toy, but Tucker had vanished. Allison stepped into the aisle, her voice shaking. It took the dog. It took the dog. That hit harder than the empty seats. If the thing had taken Tucker, the one creature that could see it coming, then it was growing bolder, smarter, choosing deliberately. She turned to Mr. Delaney. Did Tucker ever react like this before? To anything? He shook his head slowly, devastated. No, but the last time he acted even remotely scared like this was the day my wife died. He knew before I did. A woman in row 14 began to sob, clutching her child. Another man prayed out loud, rocking back and forth. Panic was cracking the cabin apart, seat by seat. And deep down, Allison understood the terrifying truth. Tucker wasn't a warning anymore. He had been the line of defense. And now, that line was broken. The cabin had quieted again, not from calm, but from a deeper kind of fear, the kind that turns screams into silence. It was the silence you'd hear in a chapel after a funeral, a silence filled with what wasn't being said. Tucker was gone. 3 passengers now, missing without a trace. No open doors. No one saw them leave. Just vanished into the sealed belly of a commercial jet. The lights remained on for now, but that didn't comfort anyone. It just meant they could see each other's fear. Allison sat stiffly beside Mr. Delaney, still gripping the end of Tucker's leash in one hand. The frayed nylon strap felt like a lifeline that had snapped. She kept going over every second in her mind, trying to remember anything that might explain what was happening. But the truth kept staring her in the face, undeniable and chilling. It wasn't turbulence. It wasn't psychological. This was real. We need to figure out who's next, Mr. Delaney said quietly, his voice hoarse. If it's choosing, there must be a pattern. Allison blinked. A pattern. He nodded. First, 23C. Then the guy in 18D. Then 10B. And now Tucker. He took out a pen from the seat back pocket and started scribbling on the in-flight magazine. We need the manifest. The flight manifest? Allison asked. He looked up at her. We need to see who's seated where. Who's missing? Who might be next? Allison hesitated, then nodded. Maybe the purser has a copy. She stood up carefully and looked around the cabin. Still no sign of the flight attendants. No Marla. The galley at the front was open, but dark. Carts Askew. A water bottle rolling slowly across the floor. She made her way toward it, trying not to startle the already jittery passengers. When she reached the galley, she saw the curtain that separated the cruise area from the cabin was hanging half-detached, like it had been torn aside violently. On a clipboard by the coffee machine, she saw it, a printed passenger manifest. She grabbed it and turned back toward the cabin. As she walked, she scanned the list. It was just names, seat numbers, and statuses, checked in, on board, meal preference. But something jumped out at her almost immediately. Row 23C. Walker, Patricia, deceased. She stopped cold. Her eyes ran over the line again. Patricia Walker, 23C. The woman who'd vanished first. Deceased. Her throat tightened. She kept reading. Row 18D. Hammond Charles, deceased. The man who'd flailed and screamed. He was on the list, but already marked as dead. And then, row 10B. Cruz Maria, deceased. No, Allison whispered. No, that's not right. They were on the plane. I saw them. She flipped through the manifest again. Her own name, Allison Ray, 15A, was there. Status, on board. Mr. Delaney. On board. But Tucker, his name wasn't listed. He had a tag, a crate, a boarding pass, but no name on the manifest. And just as that thought took shape, Allison saw something else. Row 21B, blank. Just blank. No name. No status. She looked up quickly. 21B was directly behind 23C. She walked back and stared at it. Empty, untouched, and cold. So cold she could see her breath in the air directly over the seat. She turned back to Delaney, clutching the manifest. Some of the people who disappeared, they were already marked as dead. Before the flight. He blinked. That's not possible. She held it up. Someone, or something, is on this flight that wasn't supposed to be here. And it's not a person. She pointed to the blank seat. Delaney's face went pale. What if that's where it boarded? Allison stared at seat 21B as if expecting it to suddenly move. The air around it had grown noticeably colder. Not the kind of chill from air conditioning, but a damp, unnatural cold that seemed to seep into her bones. She reached her hand out slowly, hesitantly, and hovered her fingers an inch above the fabric. Her skin prickled immediately. Goosebumps spread down her arms. There was no one sitting there, but it felt occupied. Worse, it felt aware. She pulled her hand back like she'd touched a stove. Mr. Delaney stood behind her now, reading over her shoulder. No name, no ticket, just an empty space. You think that's where it started? Allison nodded slowly. That seat isn't just empty, it's wrong. She showed him the manifest. Look at the progression. Everyone who vanished was seated near this row. 23C was just ahead. 18D was to the side. 10B was directly across the aisle. And Tucker, he pointed straight here. Delaney exhaled shakily. So whatever's on this flight, it started in 21B. Allison's voice dropped. Or it boarded from there. He raised a skeptical brow. Boarded? From what, the jetway? Some ghost just swiped a boarding pass. No, she said. Not from the gate. From somewhere else. From before. Maybe even before the plane landed last. Passengers were beginning to stir again. Whispers spread. Someone had overheard them talking about the manifest, and soon others began demanding to see it. a tall man in first class shouted. "Are you saying we've got a dead person's name on the passenger list?" Another woman cried out, "I want off this plane. Let me off." Allison stood on a seat to be seen. "Everyone, listen to me. Something is on this plane. Something that shouldn't be. We're not crazy. It's not hallucinations. It's not a prank. People are disappearing, and it's not random. There's a pattern." Gasps rippled through the rows. A few passengers began crossing themselves. Some just shook their heads in disbelief. One woman fainted. "I think," Allison continued, "that this thing is tied to 21B. It may not be from there, but it's connected to that seat somehow. That's where it began." Then, as if summoned by her words, the lights flickered again. Not a full blackout this time, just a shudder, like the plane itself flinched. A gust of air burst from the overhead vents, sudden and ice-cold, and the curtain to the forward galley suddenly snapped open. Marla stood there, pale, trembling, eyes wide and unblinking. Allison's breath caught. "Marla." The flight attendant didn't answer. Her lips moved, but no words came out. Her hands gripped the edge of the wall, like she was trying to keep herself from falling. Then, in a voice that didn't sound like her own, she whispered, "It knows you see it." The cabin fell dead silent. "What did you say?" Allison asked. Marla's head twitched toward her, like a puppet pulled on strings. "You found its seat. Now it's finding yours." Then her body collapsed. Dead weight. Allison rushed forward and caught her just before her head hit the floor. Marla's eyes fluttered, unfocused. She was still breathing, but barely. Pulse faint. Skin clammy. She looked like someone who had been dragged from the bottom of a frozen lake. As they laid her across the jump seat, Mr. Delaney looked at the manifest again. "Do you think it moves? That it changes seats?" Allison didn't answer right away, because she was staring at seat 15A, her seat, and it was now blank on the manifest. The sight of Marla, collapsed and barely conscious, sent a chill through the entire cabin. Allison knelt beside her, gently brushing damp hair from the flight attendant's pale forehead. Her pulse was faint but steady. The crowd around them had hushed, watching, breathing as if the slightest movement would shatter the fragile moment. Allison's mind raced. The manifest, her own seat, 15A, was now marked blank. She couldn't shake the feeling that the seat was alive with something dark and malevolent. Something waiting, watching. She glanced nervously around at the other passengers. Some whispered prayers. Others stared wide-eyed, gripping armrests or clutching loved ones. But Allison felt a heavy weight pressing down on her chest. The realization crept forward. If the seat was blank, if her name was no longer on the manifest, was she already gone? Was this a warning? A countdown? Her breath hitched as a sudden, inexplicable cold washed over her. Goosebumps prickled her arms despite the cabin's warmth. She looked down at the floor and saw, just for a flicker, a shimmer of movement, like a ripple across still water, trailing away from 15A and disappearing beneath the seat in front of her. "Is it here?" she whispered to Mr. Delaney. He nodded grimly. "Whatever it is, it's not just boarding passes and empty seats. It's moving." Allison's heart pounded as the reality settled in. The creature, or whatever force was at work, was not confined to a single place on the plane. It was shifting, choosing its next target. The fact that it took Tucker, the dog that could sense its presence, and then the flight attendant, Marla, showed it was becoming more confident, more brazen. Suddenly, a faint noise caught Allison's attention. A soft scraping sound coming from the row in front of her, 14B. She turned sharply and saw a woman clutching her purse tightly, her knuckles white, staring fixedly at the empty seat beside her. The seatbelt was fastened snugly across it, but the seat itself seemed to pulse as if breathing beneath the fabric. The woman's voice trembled as she whispered, "My husband. He was supposed to sit here." Allison moved closer. "Did he get off the plane?" The woman shook her head slowly. "No, he's missing. We were supposed to fly together." The cabin's panic thickened, a thick fog of fear and confusion spreading. The woman looked at Allison, eyes pleading. "Is this thing going to take me too?" Allison swallowed hard. "I don't know," she said honestly, "but we have to stay together. We have to figure this out. Suddenly, the overhead compartments on the right side began to creak open again, one by one, as if invisible hands were rifling through them. A cold gust blew down the aisle, carrying with it a faint, unpleasant smell, like wet earth and decay. Passengers scrambled back into their seats, clutching armrests, some whispering frantic prayers. Allison's breath caught as she spotted a shadow moving beneath the open bins, too large to be a trick of the light. Her mind flashed back to Tucker's barks. Whatever was here, it wasn't human. It wasn't alive in the way they understood. Then the lights flickered violently. The cabin plunged into darkness for a tense few seconds. When the emergency lights kicked on, the entire row of seats from 12 to 15 on the right side was suddenly empty. No one was in them. Not a single passenger. Only their belongings remained. Jackets, bags, a child's toy left forgotten on the floor. The passengers who had been sitting there were gone. Just like that. Allison's scream caught her throat as she stared at the empty row. People around her gasped, some sobbing openly, others frozen in shock. "Ow!" someone whispered. No one answered. Mr. Delaney's voice broke through the chaos. "We can't wait anymore. We have to get to the cockpit. Find out what's going on." Allison nodded, her legs shaking but her resolve hardening. She had to know if the pilots were still there, if the plane was even still flying on autopilot. If the crew was lost, maybe the authorities had been contacted. But deep inside, a new fear took root. If this thing could take passengers silently and vanish them into thin air, what hope did they have? The plane suddenly jolted slightly, the subtle hum of engines filling the cabin. Allison's eyes locked on the flight attendant call button glowing faintly on her armrest. She pressed it, heart pounding. No response. The silence was deafening. She looked at Mr. Delaney. "We're on our own." The realization that the flight attendants were nowhere to be found, and that the call button did nothing, sent a fresh wave of panic through Allison. She grabbed Mr. Delaney's arm, her voice shaking but firm. "We have to get to the cockpit. We need answers." He nodded, his face grim. "If the pilots are still there, maybe they can help us. If not, we're truly alone." The aisle was packed with anxious passengers, many frozen in place, some sobbing softly, others wide-eyed with fear. Allison and Delaney carefully made their way forward, their movements deliberate but urgent. The cold in the cabin seemed to intensify as they approached the front. The unsettling feeling wasn't just from the air conditioning. It was like a heavy presence lurking just out of sight. They reached the cockpit door. It was closed, the usual small window opaque with frost and condensation. Allison's hands trembled as she pressed the button to open it. There was no response. She tried again. Nothing. Delaney frowned. "Maybe it's locked." "Maybe," Allison said, her heart thudding painfully. "But we can't just stand here." Delaney pulled out a penknife from his pocket, a habit from his hiking days, and started to fiddle with the latch. After a few tense seconds, the door clicked open slightly. They pushed it gently and slipped inside. The cockpit was empty. No pilots. No co-pilot. The instruments glowed dimly, the plane seemingly on autopilot, steady as ever. But the seats were vacant, the headsets lying forgotten on the console. Allison's breath hitched. "Where could they have gone?" she whispered. Delaney stepped over to the communications panel and tapped the radio. "Mayday, mayday. This is Flight 729. Crew missing. Passengers missing. We need immediate assistance." Static was the only reply. Allison's stomach twisted. The radio was dead. "Something's wrong with the systems," Delaney said grimly. "Or someone's blocking us." A cold draft swept through the cockpit, making the lights flicker. Allison shivered. "We're trapped. On a plane with it." They left the cockpit and walked back to the main cabin. Passengers were huddled together, whispering prayers, rocking children, trying to stay calm. Allison's eyes swept over the rows again, the ones that had emptied so suddenly. The fear was thick enough to choke. Suddenly, the dog's leash tightened in Allison's hand. She looked down. Tucker had reappeared, his body tense, fur bristling. But this time, he wasn't barking. He was growling low, staring down the aisle. Something was coming. Out of the shadows between the seats, A cold mist began to swirl, forming shapes, vague, shifting outlines that resembled human forms but were twisted, distorted, and completely alien. Passengers screamed. Some scrambled backward, others froze in place. Allison gripped Tucker's collar, pulling him close. "Stay with me, boy." Delaney grabbed a metal water bottle from a nearby cart. "We have to protect ourselves." The mist coalesced into a shadowy figure, its eyes glowing faintly red. It moved with unnatural grace, gliding rather than walking. It pointed directly at Allison. Her heart hammered. She stumbled backward, but the aisle was blocked by passengers pressing closer, panic thickening the air. Tucker lunged forward, barking ferociously. The figure recoiled, dissolving momentarily into smoke, then reformed a few feet away, its red eyes fixed on Allison. "It's playing with us," Delaney whispered. "Testing." Allison swallowed hard, fighting the urge to flee. "We have to stay calm. We have to stay together." The mist began to spread faster, filling the aisles, creeping under seats, curling around luggage. The plane grew colder still, breaths turning to visible puffs in the frigid air. Suddenly, a booming voice echoed through the cabin, distorted, metallic, but unmistakably human. "Leave this plane." The passengers froze. Allison felt the words vibrate through her bones. The voice was not coming from any speaker. No device was making the sound. It was inside their heads. Delaney gripped her arm. "This thing can invade our minds." Allison nodded. "We have to fight it. We can't let it win." Tucker growled, low and fierce, standing protectively in front of her. The shadow swirled again, eyes glowing brighter, but the dog's barking grew louder. For the first time since boarding, Allison felt a flicker of hope. The shadow's red eyes burned into Allison's soul, but Tucker's fierce barking rose above the rising chaos, a raw, urgent sound that cut through the cold like a flare. The passengers, gripped by terror, instinctively drew closer around her, forming a fragile barrier against the encroaching darkness. Allison felt a surge of determination swell inside her. This thing was no ordinary threat. It was a force that preyed on fear, on isolation. But if they stood together, maybe, just maybe, they could push it back. She knelt beside Tucker, voice steady despite the pounding of her heart. "Good boy, Tucker. Stay with me." The dog's eyes met hers, sharp and unwavering. He wasn't just protecting her. He was a beacon in this nightmare. Delaney's metal water bottle clanked as he brandished it like a weapon, though the makeshift tool seemed laughably small against an invisible enemy. "We have to find the source," he said grimly. "If this thing is moving through the plane, maybe it's tied to something physical, an object, a seat, something it can't fully leave." Allison scanned the cabin, now fogged with a mist that writhed and hissed like living smoke. Her gaze landed on the now infamous seat 21B. The mist around it seemed thicker, denser, as if the seat itself exhaled the darkness. "We need to get a 21B, she said, standing and steadying herself. "It's where this all started." A woman near the back nodded, tears streaking her face. "If we don't stop it, it'll keep taking people." The crowd moved as one, fear and hope mingling in a fragile dance. Allison felt the cold bite deeper as they neared the cursed seat. The mist twisted violently, pushing against them like a physical barrier. Passengers stumbled, some crying out, others faltering in terror. Tucker growled low, stepping forward, pulling Allison with him. Suddenly, the shadow burst forth from the mist in a cloud of black smoke, its red eyes blazing brighter than ever. The passengers screamed and scrambled back, but Allison stood her ground. "Leave this plane," the voice echoed again, metallic and haunting. "No," Allison said firmly. "We're not leaving anyone behind." The figure lunged. For a moment, Allison felt the cold of its touch like ice seeping into her skin. Panic flared, but she fought it down, locking eyes with the glowing menace. Tucker barked again, and a strange thing happened. The shadow wavered, its form flickering like a dying flame. Delaney stepped forward, throwing the metal bottle directly at the shadow. It passed through the figure, but shattered on the floor beyond, the sound echoing like a gunshot. The shadow shrieked and retreated, swirling back towards seat 21B. Allison sprinted forward, hands trembling, and grabbed the armrest of 21B. The cold was intense, nearly unbearable, but her grip was firm. "Whatever you are, you don't belong here," she whispered fiercely. The mist around the seat roiled and churned. Then suddenly, the seat's fabric tore like a veil, revealing a dark hollow beneath. From the abyss came a faint, desperate whimper. Tucker barked urgently, pawing at the hole. Allison peered inside and saw a small, trembling shape. A girl, no older than 10, her clothes tattered and soaked. Her eyes were wide and frightened. "Help me," she whispered. The passengers gasped. Someone reached out a hand. Allison carefully pulled the girl free. The moment she was out, the dark mist recoiled, hissing like a scalded snake. The cabin temperature seemed to rise slightly as the mist thinned, retreating to the corners and shadows. The girl looked around, confused but safe. "I was trapped," she said softly. The darkness, it held me. Allison knelt beside her, tears streaming down her face. "You're safe now." The plane was still far from normal, still haunted by unseen forces, but the tide had turned. Together, they had pushed back the darkness, and maybe, just maybe, they could make it through. As Allison cradled the trembling girl in her arms, the cabin seemed to exhale a breath it had been holding. The fog of terror that had gripped everyone moments before lifted slightly, replaced by a fragile calm. Passengers cautiously moved closer, eyes wide with a mixture of relief and lingering fear. The girl's small frame shook as she tried to find words for the nightmare she'd just escaped. "My name is Emily," she whispered, voice barely audible. I don't know how I got here." Allison gently wiped damp hair from Emily's forehead, heart aching for the child who had endured something no one should ever face. "You're safe now, Emily. Can you tell us what happened?" Emily's eyes darted nervously to the seat beside them, the very seat she had been trapped under. "There was a dark thing," she said, voice quivering. "It caught me after I fell asleep. I was on this plane before it took off. I think." Whispers rippled through the passengers. Allison exchanged a glance with Mr. Delaney, whose expression darkened. "How long have you been trapped there?" Allison asked softly. Emily blinked, struggling to remember. "I don't know, maybe days. Or longer. I kept hearing voices in my head. The dark thing said I'd never leave." The implications hit Allison like a punch. This darkness wasn't just haunting the flight. It had captured souls, kept them hidden away. The passengers who had vanished, the flight attendants who were gone. Maybe they were trapped like Emily. Delaney knelt beside Allison, voice low. "That explains the empty seats. The people aren't gone. They're trapped in some other place." Emily shivered, her eyes wide with fear. "It's a place where time stops, where the dark thing feeds on us." Allison glanced at the cabin, noticing the shifting shadows lurking in corners, the way the mist curled around the walls. It was a prison, but one they had the power to break. "Emily, can you help us stop it?" Allison asked. "Can you tell us what it wants?" Emily nodded hesitantly. "It wants to stay here, to grow stronger. It feeds on fear, loneliness, and pain. If it can trap enough people, it will be unstoppable." The realization chilled Allison to the bone. The darkness was more than a ghost or a spirit. It was a predator hunting souls, feeding on their despair. "We have to fight it," Allison said firmly. "Together." Tucker growled softly at her feet, his eyes never leaving the shadows. Suddenly, a faint glow pulsed from Emily's wrist. A small, worn bracelet with an old charm shaped like a heart. It sparkled faintly, and Allison felt warmth radiate from it, pushing back the cold mist. "That's a charm," Emily explained. "My grandmother gave it to me. She said it protects me from darkness." Delaney's eyes widened. "Maybe that's the key. If we can find more of those things that bring light, we might be able to banish this thing for good." Allison nodded, hope flickering brighter than it had in hours. "We're not just passengers anymore. We're a team. We're going to fight this darkness, and we're going to win." The passengers, inspired by Emily's courage and Tucker's unwavering loyalty, began to gather light from their own belongings, flashlights, phone screens, anything that could pierce the shadows. Together, they formed a circle around Emily and Allison, their collective hope and light pushing the darkness back inch by inch. But Allison knew this was only the beginning. The shadow would return, stronger, more cunning. The battle for their souls had just begun. The faint glow from Emily's bracelet cast a soft, comforting light that pushed the shadows back. But Allison knew it wasn't enough to banish the darkness for good. The tension in the cabin was thick, a mixture of relief and dread swirling among the passengers. But there was a spark of determination growing too, a fragile hope taking root in the hearts of people who had felt helpless only moments before. Allison stood, her voice steady and strong as she addressed the gathered passengers. Listen up. We're not victims here. We're survivors. And if we want to get through this, we have to work together. This darkness feeds on fear and isolation. If we stand united, if we keep the light alive, we can fight it. Heads nodded, eyes brightening despite the exhaustion and fear. Delaney chimed in. We're going to organize. Volunteers, let's gather any flashlights, phones, anything that can help us keep the darkness at bay. We'll patrol the cabin in teams. We watch each other's backs. Tucker, sensing the shift in energy, barked once, sharp and clear, like a rallying cry. He moved confidently through the aisles, stopping to nuzzle and reassure passengers. His presence was a symbol of protection, a tether to safety. Emily, still in Allison's arms, looked around at the faces. I want to help too, she said softly. I know how to resist the dark. My grandma told me stories about light and love, about fighting shadows. Allison smiled at her. Then you're our secret weapon. The passengers sprang into action. Flashlights flickered on, phones lit up, and voices began to whisper encouragements and plans. The murmur of fear transformed into the hum of resistance. Meanwhile, Allison and Delaney moved through the rows, checking on those most frightened or injured. Keep moving, Allison urged gently. Don't let the dark settle anywhere. In the cockpit, the instruments flickered weakly. Allison peeked in again. The pilots were still missing, but the controls seemed stable. The plane is flying itself, Delaney observed. But we can't rely on autopilot forever. We need to find a way to communicate with the outside. Suddenly, the overhead lights flickered violently. A cold shiver ran down Allison's spine. The shadows gathered again, swirling at the edges of the cabin like a storm ready to break. The voice returned, distorted and ominous. You cannot escape. A passenger gasped, clutching a friend's arm. But Tucker barked loudly, stepping between the shadows and the frightened group. The dog's courage ignited something powerful. Hope. Allison grabbed a flashlight and raised it high, its beam cutting through the darkness. Stand together, she commanded. Hold the light. We will not give in. The mist receded slightly, as if wary of the combined strength of the passengers and their shining lights. But the battle was far from over. Allison's heart pounded as she realized this was a fight for their very souls, and they had only just begun to push back. The cabin was tense, electric with a mix of fear and fierce determination. Allison stood firm, her flashlight piercing the murky gloom that clung to the airplane like a living shadow. Around her, passengers clutched their own lights tightly, their faces pale but resolute. Tucker, ever vigilant, stood at Allison's side, his hackles raised, growling low and warning any darkness that dared approach. The oppressive voice echoed again, chilling and metallic, yet filled with desperation. You cannot stop me. This plane is mine. But Allison refused to back down. You're wrong, she shouted, voice ringing through the cabin. This isn't your domain. We will not let you take us. The dark mist twisted, swirling violently as it condensed into a towering figure, a shadow cloaked in swirling smoke with eyes glowing like embers. It moved with unnatural speed, sweeping through the cabin in waves of chilling cold. The passengers huddled tighter, their lights flickering but never extinguished. Emily clutched Allison's hand tightly, her bracelet glowing softly, a tiny beacon of hope. "It's afraid of the light," she whispered, eyes wide but steady. Allison nodded, scanning the cabin for anything to bolster their defense. She caught sight of the emergency exit lights and called out, "Help me turn on all the emergency lights." A group of volunteers dashed to the control panels, flipping switches. The harsh red and white emergency lights flared to life, flooding the cabin with harsh, unnatural brightness. The shadow screamed, a terrible, echoing sound that sent chills down everyone's spine. The figure recoiled, its form flickering and fragmenting as if the light burned it away. "Keep the lights on," Allison urged. "Don't let it hide." Tucker barked and lunged toward the nearest swirl of darkness. His bark was sharp and fierce, a challenge that echoed through the cabin. The shadow retreated further, forced into the narrow aisles and corners. Allison felt a sudden surge of energy, an urge to fight with every fiber of her being. She moved to the front of the plane, the place where the darkness seemed strongest, and pointed her flashlight at the cockpit door. "Open up," she called. "We need to see what's inside." Delaney joined her, gripping a metal rod he'd found, ready to defend. The door creaked, then slowly swung open. Inside, the pilot sat motionless, eyes closed but breathing steady. They were alive, but trapped in some kind of trance. Allison approached cautiously, shining her light on them. "We're here to help," she said softly. One pilot's eyes fluttered open, confusion evident. The shadow hissed in frustration, swirling furiously, but the combined light held it at bay. Allison reached for the pilot's wrists, feeling their weak pulses. "We have to wake them," she told Delaney. He nodded, searching for the radio panel. "If we can get them to communicate, maybe we can call for help." Suddenly, the darkness surged one last time, rushing toward them like a tidal wave. Passengers yelled, gripping each other's hands. But Tucker stood firm, barking furiously, his presence a barrier. The shadow shrieked and dissipated in a final burst of smoke, leaving the cabin still and cold. But the oppressive weight was gone. Allison exhaled deeply, relief flooding her. The pilots stirred fully, blinking in confusion but alive. Emily smiled faintly, her bracelet's glow fading to a gentle warmth. "It's over," she whispered. Allison looked around at the faces of the passengers, tired, shaken, but alive. They had faced the darkness together, and they had won. The oppressive weight that had pressed down on the plane for hours finally lifted. Allison's heart still raced, adrenaline fading into a deep exhaustion that settled in her bones. Around her, the passengers were slowly beginning to breathe freely again, the fog of fear receding like a dark tide pushed back by the light. Tucker sat quietly at Allison's feet, panting softly but alert, as if still standing guard against unseen threats. The pilots, now fully conscious, exchanged grateful glances and reassured the passengers that the plane was stable and that help was already on the way. Allison found herself near the front of the cabin, watching Emily, the little girl who had been the key to unraveling the nightmare. Emily's bracelet still glowed faintly, a quiet symbol of the light and hope that had defeated the darkness. The child's eyes, once wide with terror, now shone with a quiet strength that belied her years. Allison felt a profound respect for her courage and resilience. Outside the windows, the first hint of dawn painted the sky with soft pinks and golds. The long night of terror and uncertainty was ending. The plane was still miles from its destination, but the battle had been won. They had not only survived, but had done so together, united by something stronger than fear, hope and courage. Allison glanced at the faces around her, strangers who had become a family, bound by shared hardship. There was Mr. Delaney, quietly comforting an elderly woman, and the young couple who had held hands through the darkest moments. The crew, though shaken, moved with renewed purpose, their professionalism restored. Even the cabin buzzed with low murmurs of relief and cautious smiles. The memory of the shadow lingered like a fading nightmare, but its power was broken. No longer a phantom lurking unseen, it had been faced and overcome. And Allison knew this experience had changed them all forever. "Thank you," Emily said softly, coming over to Allison. "You helped me when I was scared. You didn't give up." Allison smiled, kneeling to meet the girl's gaze. "You helped all of us, Emily. Your light showed the way." Tucker wagged his tail, nuzzling Emily gently. The bond between the dog and the child was unmistakable, a reminder that sometimes the purest courage comes from the most unexpected places. As the plane continued its steady flight toward home, Allison felt a deep sense of peace settle over her. The darkness may have come to haunt them, but had been chased away by the strength of human spirit and a barking dog who refused to be silent. The sun rose higher, flooding the cabin with warm light, washing away the shadows for good. Outside, the world awaited, unaware of the quiet miracle that had unfolded miles above the clouds. And as the passengers prepared to land, their hearts full of relief and hope, Allison knew one thing for certain. Sometimes the fiercest protectors come on four paws, and the greatest battles are won not by fear, but by the courage to face the unknown together. Thank you so much for joining us on this thrilling journey through the skies, where courage, hope, and an extraordinary dog showed us that even in the darkest moments, light can prevail. If this story captivated you and stirred your imagination, please don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel for more incredible tales. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment below to share your favorite part or any ideas you have for future stories. Your support means the world to us, and together, we can keep exploring the mysteries that lie just beyond the horizon. Until next time, stay brave and keep the light shining bright.